In this next video topic, I'd like to discuss the Enlightenment of the 18th century. And we're going to look at the background of the Enlightenment itself. And then probably in the second part of this video, we'll discuss then the Enlightenment itself. In chapter 18 of your book, on page 461, a question is posed. Who were the leading figures of the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment, and what were their main contributions? And that's what I want to delve into in this video. The Enlightenment of the 18th century was born mainly out of three leading figures of the 17th century. One of these was a scientist, Isaac Newton. And the other two were English philosophers. One was named Thomas Hobbes, and the other John Locke. The scientific revolution, which took place in the 17th century, is what allows for Enlightenment thinking and basically the creation of our modern understanding of ourselves and the universe and the roles we play within the human experience and the universe. So Isaac Newton is this leading figure of the 17th century, probably the most important scientist until Albert Einstein. And what he lays out in some of his writings, particularly the Principia, were one, he lays out in 1687 the published theory of gravitation. What's important here is that, one, it was allowed to be published. From World Civilization 1, if you've already taken it, you know that Europe was controlled by basically two institutions. One, the state, say a king, a queen, an emperor, and two, the Catholic Church. And the Catholic Church had a basically domination of all intellectual, religious, moral thinking, etc. And scientists like Galileo and Copernicus had theories that, as the church saw it, contradicted the Bible. What's interesting is that Isaac Newton, in the 1600s, is not only able to publish this, and it's not only beginning to be accepted in academic and intellectual circles, but it becomes accepted by the church. And basically the church accepts some of these principles that we'll refer to as the laws of nature, universal laws, because they begin to see these ideas of Newton's as not contradictory to the Bible, but rather simply explaining how God created the universe. So gravitation is simply a method by which God allowed the universe to exist as it does. In other words, Newton is explaining how God's miraculous work is actually how it works. And by that, Newton also further developed these ideas with the church's consent into more or less what is referred to in your book as the world machine concept. And in this concept, Newton has laid out that the universe is like a machine, and it has certain ways, mechanical ways, if you want to think about it like that, mechanical ways of how the universe works. In other words, God had once upon a time created this machine flip the switch, and now the machine works in its beautiful ways. But Newton tried to explain how the machine worked. And people that you may be familiar with, like Benjamin Franklin, were this changed their entire concept of religion as well. They weren't particularly atheists. They were what was referred to in the 18th century as deists. And a deist believed in this concept that there is a God, and that God had created the earth and the universe and humans, but then had sort of gone off to do whatever such a being would do. In other words, he's no longer interfering with either human existence or the universe for which we find ourselves in. And so the deist thinks of it in this metaphorical way, that God is like a clockmaker. God created the most intricate clock that you could possibly fathom, that is the universe, set the clock going, and then went away to perhaps create other universes. But to understand the universe is to understand the how the clock works, and what Newton and others put as the laws of nature, or the laws of the universe. And this is what the Enlightenment thinkers tried to understand, how the clock works. And Newton, Isaac Newton, who lived from 1642 until 1727, he taught at Cambridge University in England, and he had a tremendous impact on philosophers, and two very important philosophers in England, again, Thomas Hobbes and John Locke. What Newton basically created was the scientific method. The idea that you observe, and that you test, and that you hypothesize, and you further study a theory until its completion, until it's basically considered a law of nature. And these philosophers took the ideas of the scientific method and the scientific revolution and adapted it to other possibilities, such as, whereas Newton was trying to understand the laws of the universe, perhaps you could adapt the scientific method to understanding the laws of perhaps government, politics, economics, justice, religion, etc. And this is what Hobbes and Locke begin to do. So Isaac Newton in the Scientific Revolution gives birth, basically, to the Enlightenment. So what do Hobbes and Locke have to say about the earth and the universe and human beings, and as it applies to these new concepts? Hobbes began to look at the question of government. Why do we have a government? What is the purpose of government? And you must put this into the context of Europe at the time, as we have looked at absolutism, monarchical rule, etc. And what Hobbes basically theorizes is the idea of, one, the social or rather the understanding that all human beings once existed in a world, a societal organization, in which human beings fought for the most basic of rights, if you will. That is, that human beings lived in what he called the, quote, state of nature, end quote. Whereas once upon a time we lived in this world without any of the certainly societal or cultural or economic structures. We were naked. We were free in the most absolute way. There were no laws that kept us from doing anything we wanted to do. We lived off the land, etc. So, sort of the caveman world. And Hobbes says that in this world, things were, yes, we sort of had ultimate freedom, but things were very nasty, very brutish. Life was very short and brutal in this world, in the world of the state of nature. And he then theorizes that basically at some point humans came to an understanding that someone must be in charge. Some set of laws must be enacted in order to protect ourselves from, one, ourselves, from each other, and two, from an outside force. So let me give you an example. Say you're living in this world and you and your family have chosen some piece of land to live on and create some sort of existence. Someone comes during the night with a giant mammoth bone and crushes your skull and the skulls of your entire family, steals everything you have. What is the repercussions of this? Well, nothing. There are, for the person who has committed basically what we would consider murder, they probably have no moral. There's no guilt, no moral repercussions, and there's certainly no repercussions in the term in the sense of criminal punishment, right? For doing this, and therefore, in the state of nature, life is very dangerous. And you and your family at all times live in a state of constant fear. Therefore, Hobbes says that in that state of fear, and with the knowledge that all humans ultimately desire happiness and peace for themselves, their family, and perhaps for other human beings, that at some point they gave up these natural rights in order to put someone in charge. Who would the someone be? Perhaps the strongest warrior in a clan, ultimately becoming what we would refer to as a king, or more than that, someone in charge that sets about laws that must be followed. If you break the laws, you will be punished. And depending on what civilization we're talking about, it could be imprisonment or something, but it could be death. Therefore, you have reasons not to commit certain acts of violence. And in that way, we have then become more civilized. We have accepted that we can no longer do whatever we want, because there are consequences. And it's John Locke who then takes this to the next sort of level. He picks up where Hobbes left off. And John Locke basically creates the idea of what we'll discuss in the next video of the social contract theory, in which humans engage in a not a literal but a contract with other humans, in which they agree to basically lessen the amount of natural rights they have in order for a government to be formed to protect themselves, once again, from themselves and also an outside force, say another civilization, a foreign army which would invade and take what they have. And so this social contract theory is the next sort of step in understanding what the Enlightenment thinkers of the 18th century began to develop, what we can call the rational reason with a capital R. So we'll explore that in video 2.